Hey guys, this is Insight actually number 2. There isn't a number 1, I just called it an intro, but yeah, number 1, that's right. We were just talking about why we don't talk about the cross and how actually important it is, and we just had a little sort of thought around that. So if you want to go watch that one, absolutely do. Totally worth it. It's in 2 parts because I was running out of time because I talk too much, Big surprise there. But yeah, go have a look. It's pretty cool. Good thought from John Hilton III. He's an amazing teacher about this topic and about Jesus, everything in itself. And a nice little poem that I found, which is really cool. So go check those out. But anyway, so this is in Mark 15, 29 to 30. And I've just entitled it, Save Thyself, Why Don't You? Because that's what the crowd was saying that was there. So let's have a look at the scripture itself. So this is mentioned briefly in John, but it's mostly Matthew, Mark, and Luke that have this in it. But I picked the Mark one just because it's a little more descriptive of how they were. So, 29. And they that passed by railed on him, as in mockery full out, wagging their heads and saying, "Ah, thou that destroyest the temple and buildest it in 3 days, eh? Ha ha ha. Save thyself and come down from the cross." You proclaim to be all this and you do all that, but you can't save yourself. Much like happened at the witch trials, really. Not that I'm comparing the two, but they were like, well, if a witch, if she's truly a witch, we'll drown her, and if she saves herself, then we'll know that she's not, that she definitely is a witch. I'm like, oh, and otherwise she's dead? It just doesn't make sense, and this doesn't either. So save thyself, why don't you? If you can do all these things, why don't you save yourself? And they're just missing the bigger picture. So, totally valid question, right? In a worldly point of view. If you're living in the world and you don't have Christian belief and you don't even have religious belief, or maybe your religion is something totally different, that's your choice. That's great for you. But from that point of view, I can see why this question's asked. Because that would make sense to me. If I was sitting in that side, I'd be like, yeah, well, you proclaim to do all these things. You've done all these other miracles. You've raised people from the dead, right? So why can't you just get down? You could totally just get down. And he could have. This is the thing. Jesus totally could have not been there. He could have left and not been arrested. He could have, pleaded his case and made more of a case with Herod and with Pilate to not be there. He could have made it that way, but he didn't. So why didn't he? So here's the thing. So the same question even comes now when people say, why does God let bad things happen? Right? So my answer, and it's not a new concept, is, well, why don't you ask him? So I would have probably said to, and maybe some people did, right? And this is not recorded. So maybe his mother said that to those people that walk past. Maybe they engaged. But we often know that engaging with people who are that negative and that mocking to begin with is going to be pointless. They're not in a space to listen or to learn. They're just literally there to poke fun and have a good laugh. So it's no point in engaging at that point. Whatever the topic might be, that's not the place to engage. And you also get that crowd mentality that comes in there. But the same question, if you can't get down off the cross, well, why does God let bad things happen? And all those questions that fall in that same category. So it's not a new concept to say, just ask him. Have a prayer and ask, why is this bad thing happening? Why are you letting this happen? And, oftentimes he's going to say, and why do you let bad things happen? And you're like, oh, do I? Just think about it. But people won't ask because they're not yet ready to see more or to change what is right in front of them. So if you saw those miracles and didn't believe, they're not ready to change yet. And they might in the future, like Paul does. We're going to get into reading about him once we get through the Acts of the Apostles, and Paul sort of falls in sort of somewhere near the end there. But most of the Acts are more teachings from Christ, which is fantastic because we're not finished with Christ's teachings yet. There's some amazing stuff happening there. And by that point, the disciples and the apostles that he's got there are all like, oh my gosh, we know it's you. You came back, but we saw you die. That's really cool. They get it and are more converted, like we talked about last week, and they're ready to receive more. So that's a really cool thing that we're going to head into in a couple of weeks. I think we've got one more week of the Gospels just to finish up, and then we're into Acts, which is just good stuff. But these people aren't ready to change what's right in front of them. So they will often have that defensive reaction around the mockery, like, why don't you save yourself? Or, oh, God, let this happen, and I'm going to hate on him from it, because you want to blame someone. You don't want it to be your fault. You don't want to take any responsibility, and you don't want to just say, oh, it's part of a bigger picture, a grand plan. Like, we believe that, but often our human weakness doesn't allow that concept to resonate. So we're not ready to change what's right in front of us. We need to lose weight for our health, for example, or we need to, we've got heart problems, so we need to limit salt. And some people can do that, but there's a lot of people that cannot change what's right in front of them. The options are, you're going to have a heart attack and die. You've got to limit salt and fat. And they're like, oh, no, I don't want to do that. I want to eat this, and I want to eat that, and I want to do that. And it's like, well, that's your options. Drop those things, have a heart attack. That's what's going to happen. Like, everyone's telling you that. And yet you will still continue and perpetuate the bad behavior that's going to give you a heart attack because you're not ready to change yet. And it's not often until after an event that you're like, oh, that was scary, I better change. And even then, it still doesn't get to some people. So don't be so judgy on these people. They were just looking from their non-Christian, non-believing point of view. They're not ready to change yet. They could have changed later. Might have changed in the moment by watching it and then gone home and think, hey, everybody was mocking him, but it probably wasn't good to do that. Like, you don't know, right? We don't know so much about these people. But yeah, and the bigger point here too, why didn't Jesus help himself down? Because he could have. We know he could have. So why didn't he? Because he was, and he is still, helping all of us. Dying on the cross was essential to the process. The whole atonement, the whole allowing us to live eternally, that needed to happen. Why exactly? We don't know entirely. We can postulate and we can discuss and we can have ideas. Don't really know. It's just a higher law. One day we'll find out. And a lot of things we'll find out one day. But for now, we just got to satisfy ourselves with that's what had to happen. Yes, he could have saved himself. And he did in a way, in a better way. Because he could have come down off there and been human. But he decided to finish that and overcome death, rise again, so that we could. And he was doing it for us. And I think that's why it's also so personal to him. Because it was his personal gift to each of us. Gethsemane was experiencing what each of us felt. What he did on the cross was a gift for each of us. So, yeah. I just always look at this, again, because this gives me such a great example of what he was able to do in the midst of so much ugliness being thrown at him, and people not believing him, and people hating on him. Everything he did in his entire life was, when people say, oh, Jesus knows what it was like because he suffered, he knows what your suffering's like because of that. And I always used to think, well, he suffered it for a few hours, or it was only in Gethsemane for a few hours. How could you possibly know what a lifetime of that is like? And he does, though, because it's not just Gethsemane and on the cross. It's his entire life where he was never safe. He was always on the run. He had people not liking him. I mean, who's to say that even all his siblings liked him and followed him? We don't know. He could have had family tragedy. Like, we know his mother was there at the cross with him. Where was his dad? Has his dad passed away? Did his dad not come? Like, we don't know. And I just think, well, all those things. So I echo the words of Paul, who went through a mighty change of conversion as well. And then a letter to the Philippians. You find this in Philippians 4:13. And this is also echoed by Ammon in Alma. You'll read that. Similar sentiment. He just simply said, I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. And the reason Christ is able to do that is because of what he did and that gift to us. So we know that we can do all these hard things and that he really is there to help us, and he really was gifting this beautiful thing to us. So that's why he didn't do that. He saved himself in a better way so that he could save all of us too. And I think that's beautiful. So there you go. Have a think on that. All right, hang around. We're going to get to the other ones.